All right, guys, we've got an incoming question here from over on the blog. Fritz, solo games. I was going to say top 5, but a list of solo games, purely solo, that you can recommend that you enjoy playing. That's what we're going to focus on in this vlog, and I'm going to push out my top 3, 4, 5 games that are out there with a brief summary of why. Now, I have to say, there's a little bit of a bias here. If you've been following my channel, if you've been reading my blog, you can see the influence of wargaming and role-playing gaming, Dungeons and Dragons, infused into my board gaming personality. I love miniature-based games. There's a couple of card games like Xeno Shift and Pathfinder Adventure card game, which I play the heck out of. I really enjoy, but most of my games, they will be miniature-based games. And I also like dungeon crawler type games. Exploration, grab the loot, level up, fight some monsters, beat a dragon at the end. Those type of games tend to capture my imagination, although there are some entries sci-fi in there. We're also going to be looking at pure co-op. It is you as an individual, or if you were playing it with a group, versus the AI of the game. No overlord, no house rules, because not to say that you can't house rule a game to play solo, but I want to solo it out of the box. An example of this would be Conan, the board game. Fantastic, an amazing board game, an amazing experience on so many levels. But it's an overlord system. 3 or 4 friends play Conan and Friends, and they're up against you, who's a necromancer who controls the bosses and the monsters. A lot of tactical play. Really amazing. When you try to house rule it and adjust it for some sort of randomization to run the AI to play the Overlord, and there's a couple of rules released for it, it works, but it falls kind of flat. So I wouldn't recommend Conan right out of the gate for that. We want that true solo experience. Number 1 on my list right now, and it's been consistent, and actually I have it out right now playing it, Runebound 3rd Edition. And here's why this works for me. In the core game, you have 2 scenarios, and no spoilers here, this is what's on the back of the box. You fight a dragon lord, a dragon, and or you have to stop a necromancer. So you have 2 missions right out of the box. There's a couple of smaller expansions that are reasonable, so you can push the game out, and the smaller expansions are additional missions and characters, so there's no rules bloat, and just typical Fantasy Flight blows up into something quite unexpected. It's a nice, compact core game. It's an overland adventure game, so you've got the realm, and it has a timer track where you have to complete the mission in X number of turns. But it doesn't tell you how. So through exploration with your character, you can choose to fight monsters. You can choose to explore the realm. No fighting, just explore ruins and explore caves and kind of follow up on historical leads, do different quests. You can build up social interactions in there by meeting NPCs, non-player characters, by interacting with other heroes. So you have 3 different paths to win each mission, either dedicated path or combinations of them. You also have numerous player characters that have abilities and play different. So going into that fantasy play, a lot of different choices. Now we layer over a really interesting shop system. So you go into the town and the villages and the cities, and there's magic items. Armor, weapons, spells, artifacts. So you get to explore that from different ways. 2 more layers that I find interesting, and this is, of course, very polarizing for the game, but I enjoy it from that experience. The dice handle movement, and they have symbols on it. So you take the dice, you roll them, and you match the symbols up with the terrain. So it's a little puzzle of optimally how do you want to move. And as you buy more equipment and gear, you can add more dice to your hand. Combat is handled by taking a bunch of, well, they call them runes, but they're pogs that have values on them, symbols. You take these pogs and you cast them out, and you activate the symbols to cause damage and use magic items and have special effects. So there's kind of like 2 little mini games in terms of combat and movement that work. The game is completely solo because the card-based engine and the combat and everything and the timer track plays itself on there. And it works. That's my number one choice. Simply because it has so much theme, it has so much replayability, it plays pretty fast. There's no campaign supported. It's a bunch of solo adventures. And it's just complex enough that you have a lot of choices. I love Gloomhaven. I love Gloomy. I wouldn't recommend Gloomy as solo in most cases because of the complexity. Gloomhaven, the complexity is so much. Sometimes you struggle with it on there. This game just works. Number 2, and this has been surprising me. I want to push this out here now because it's a good time, because being Games Workshop, it's not always going to be available. And there's a first expansion released. They're going to be releasing some other expansions. This is a good time to think about this type of game. Warhammer Quest Blackstone Fortress. This is a sci-fi based game, but it shares numerous aspects of a dungeon crawler. Now, the challenge here, the buy-in for this, if you are a Warhammer 40,000 enthusiast or you know about the Warhammer 40K universe, everything makes sense. If you don't, you have to learn a little bit about the narrative. I mean, the mechanics are great, the miniatures are great, the gameplay is great, but certain things, as in the monsters you're fighting in the Blackstone Fortress, they might not really make that much sense. So there is a little bit of a learning curve. But the reason why, compared to, say, Runebound, which is just generic fantasy, I mean, that's it. The reason why I recommend Blackstone Fortress is that it has numerous unique features, and it was built specifically for solo/competitive play with your friends, meaning you're all on the same team. The narrative, really quick, is there's this ancient space station, the Blackstone Fortress, that's been discovered, and various explorers are going into the fortress to recover lost tech, and there's a lot of crazy stuff in there. It's a tile-based exploration system, but the tiles, it's a very organic layout. The tiles have a lot of different angles, and they're a little bit more circular. So it creates a dungeon different than kind of the standard dungeon games where it's like, okay, here's a square room, and here's a corridor, and here's another square room. There's a lot of different choke points, there's a lot of different movement points, and a lot of different ways to configure the dungeon based on the cards you pull, and it's different and it's random every time. So I found it tactically very, very refreshing and interesting versus just like, here's a room, here's a corridor, here's another room. You go in, of course, monsters spawn on there. The monsters each have an AI card, and there's a little bit of a learning curve here in terms of activation and keeping track of who moves where. But based on the monster personality, you roll a d6 for each miniature. And you look on this chart, and based on where it is and the type of monster and what's going on, it performs a specific action on that personality. That action might be just charge ahead and try to shoot as much as it can. It could be standing in place. It could be sneaking off into the shadows. It could be trying to outflank. There's a definite feel of AI. And what's interesting is the AI, of course, is not overly complex, where you're spending like 10 minutes moving a single miniature and figuring out what it's going to do. It is somewhat simplified, but that simplicity based on the personality of the miniatures, it gets the job done. It just works on there. And sometimes you're constantly surprised. You know, you're in this kind of sci-fi space fortress dungeon. A lot of monsters are spawning, a lot of monsters are running around, and you really have to be careful because you think you have it memorized what they're going to do, and then they charge and they surprise you. Pretty interesting on there. Treasure, loot, leveling up. The game is interesting in that you recover lost tech. You can take it back to a phase in the game and sell it and buy equipment. So your characters are going to level up. They're going to get new abilities. They're going to get new items. So it has that aspect. It is a campaign-based game. It's specifically set up, absolutely no spoilers. It is specifically set up where in the center of the station is a vault. And in that vault is a piece of technology, is a treasure, is something of fantastic power, and you need to get into the center of that vault. However, in order to locate the vault, you need to access 4 strongholds. So the game is randomly exploring the space station, generated every time differently through cards, till you get enough clues to discover one of these strongholds. You then have to beat the stronghold, get part of the key. Then you do the second one, the third one, the fourth one. So expect campaign play. But you could also play it just one-off if you want to just kind of explore through and see what the Blackstone Fortress has. It just works, and it's streamlined, and it plays fast, and it certainly is something very, very unique, being a dungeon crawler sci-fi. I love it. But then again, I am a Warhammer 40,000 enthusiast. You do have to know a little bit about the lore on there to explore it. Number 3, Zombicide Black Plague. Zombicide Black Plague. And one could argue Black Plague should be number 2. Zombicide Black Plague plays like the other Zombicide games. You have a bunch of characters. You're escaping a zombie-infested city. Only it's sword and sorcery and magic. Zombies spawn. You cut them down. There's a zombie abomination. You're looking at 100 miniatures on the table, and you're like, are we going to use all those miniatures? Yeah, they're going to spawn. The game is somewhat simplistic. You move, you roll dice to explore and hit and open doors. But it works on there. It's a little bit swingy in terms of balance. Sometimes you just really get overwhelmed, but it works with how it plays. And it's very accessible as a solo player because, again, it's card-driven with the AI. So you could play the 6 characters. You could adjust it. I've even tried to play it. I say try because I think the success rate is very low. I've played it with just 1 or 2 heroes on there, which is just, insane mode on that. It's fun. It plays quick. You could get in some Zombicide. You could put it away. It works on there. There is also Zombicide Modern, if you want to go for a more kind of modern approach to it. And releasing soon, as of the date of this podcast, when I'm pushing it up to my archive, I went in on the Kickstarter. There's Zombicide Invader, which is essentially Zombicide in space. The zombies have been replaced by aliens, and the sci-fi modern heroes have been replaced with space dudes on there. So I'm really looking forward to Zombicide in space and seeing that mechanic. Number 4. This is a little bit polarizing on there, but for me it works, and I push it out there because it's the closest feeling I've had to Diablo the board game. How there isn't a Diablo the board game, I have no idea. I mean, talk about a license to print money. Sell the core, sell expansions, sell packs of cards for $12.99 each that have like random items in there, and you're trying to buy cards for like your set items. I mean, just how is there not a Diablo the board game? That's insane. Dark Souls, the board game. Dark Souls, it's interesting because essentially you set up the dungeon, you reveal a tile and spawn monsters, you beat them down, you get some souls, and then you run through the dungeon again fighting the same monsters to get more souls. There's a grind to it. You get gear, which is randomly dropped, and when you think you're ready, you fight a mini-boss. Then you repeat that with more powerful minions. You move on to a main boss. And then if you have the expansions, you move on to the mega boss on there. The complaint, it's completely AI in that when you enter a room, you have a card that's going to show you how the minions act. And when you fight the boss monsters, you build a deck of actions. And you flip a card every turn, and that tells you how the monster acts or reacts based on what's going on. It works. It plays. It has that feeling of fighting like an AI or an opponent on there, and it's got that fantasy feel. It's got the sword and sorcery. I like it, but it's grindy because you're going through and revisiting the same rooms, the same monsters 2 or 3 times or 4 times in each run. Of course, you have more gear and with each run and different tactics to try out. I think it really works as a solo game. I mean, we've played it with the gaming group, but these days Dark Souls I mainly play solo because I can set it up and know I'm going to go for the boss. I can spend 20 or 30 minutes before I got to go to work, just grind through, get a couple of souls, and then, leave it. Come back at night, grind through some more. Am I ready for the boss, the mini boss? Not yet. I'll do another run through the dungeon. Go through there again. That works if you're playing by yourself, one of the heroes, or you can play all 4 heroes or 2 heroes or 3 heroes. But playing it with a gaming group, not so much. What I do recommend, and it has this Diablo feel, because you just go into the dungeon, you beat on a bunch of stuff, you get some souls, which are the currency, you buy some gear that's random drops back at the blacksmith, you see what you can do, where you're going to level up, and when you're ready, you fight a boss. And, it's a miniature game, and it's got dice, and you're doing all that. I have to say, you need the expansions. You need some of the expansions. You need the Dark Root expansion for some additional minions to fight, and you want to look at some of the mega bosses, at least the Asylum Demon and the Dragon, because they are epic with fighting. They are absolutely, out of all the board games that I've played, those battles are epic. It's also should be noted probably a solo game, because imagine you've played for 3 hours with a group, 2.5, 3 hours, to get to the mega boss, the third boss, the final boss. You're all geared up. You're ready to go. You've got your tactics down. You've invested 3 hours real time into your character. And the mega bosses are so powerful, no spoilers here, they just stomp you into the ground the first time, because you're like, I don't know what the heck to expect. There's a lot of rage quit on there. There's a lot of people that be like, I've invested 3 hours of my life and I just got stomped. Like, forget it. No way. I'm done on there. If it's solo, you just have a good laugh and you kind of start it over again. But Dark Souls, for me, absolutely works. Last solo mention, and it's not a miniature-based game, but I've played the heck out of it. I continue to play the heck out of it. I really enjoy it for what it is. I mention it to keep it on your radar because there is a new edition coming out, so buying in now unless you could get a really good deal used. Pathfinder, the adventure card game, specifically the first set, Rise of the Rune Lords. This, out of all the games that I played, this replicates, I was going to say Dungeons and Dragons, commit mad heresy here for a second, right? Pathfinder players, because they're not interchangeable, although Pathfinder players would think so. Dungeons and Dragons players, not so much. Pathfinder, the adventure card game, you have a character. The cards are your health, and they're your items, and their armor and abilities and spells and followers. And you explore parts of the game where locations, you flip over cards, you build the location ahead of time with items and characters and traps and things to explore. You flip over a card randomly, and you resolve it with dice, combat checks, skill checks. And it's a campaign-based game that's linked together where you level up. You level up pretty quick on there. It's card-based. It works. It's kind of a dice chucker, but it works on there. I really enjoy it. I've been through the campaign about 4 times. No spoilers. I played through it with a lot of the different characters. I've even just played some solo runs where I built a couple of decks on various things just to explore and see what I can uncover in the realm. So it has a lot of homebrew exploration potential on there. But again, and it is one of my favorite games. It's up there. I play it a lot, but I've got the core set. I've got the Rune Lords. I'm set to go. They are releasing an updated version of it, changing a couple of the mechanics, making it a little bit more inclusive of some other sets. So I would say it's worth waiting, but definitely keep it on your radar to check out when it does get released. As of this podcast. So what was that? 3, 4, 5 games, 4 or 5 games on there. I'm going to turn it over to you guys now. Solo recommendations. And I could go, to top 10 list. Other games that are on there are things like Gloomhaven, Descent 2nd Edition with the app and the card-based dungeon that runs it. I was going to say Forgotten Souls. No, Forgotten something. Certainly, I really love Massive Darkness. I mean, there's other games that qualify, but in terms of the list that shifts up and down and what I'm playing right now, those would be my top recommendations. Asking me right now. I'm going to flip it over to you guys. Solo board game recommendations. Pure solo, pure co-op. Again, what should I be checking out? What should I be potentially adding to this list?